Hello everyone and welcome to Cybersecurity Case Files, where we break down some of the most prolific cybersecurity attacks. Today, we go through the NVIDIA data breach of 2022. But before we dive in, please be sure to like and subscribe, as this is the best way to support my work. Be sure to check out my TikTok, where I post daily cybersecurity updates. Now let's get into it. The first signal isn't a red siren or a blinking alert on a SOC wall. It's a quiet wobble in the rhythm of a network that usually runs like a metronome. A credential is accepted when it shouldn't be. A repository is touched at an odd hour by a session with a familiar shape and an unfamiliar gate. Inside, a campus where GPU architectures are sketched on whiteboards and compiler flags are argued like politics, an adversary slips into the spaces where ordinary work happens. Email, source control, build farm, and identity. There's no encryption splash screen, no skull and crossbones on a developer's monitor, just access, just reach. By the time anyone outside notices, the adversary is already in the room where secrets are stored in plain text code. Not just any code, but the connective tissue of a computing empire. Drivers, firmware stubs, performance features with names that have become shorthand for the state of the art. Screenshots begin circulating in chat rooms and Telegram channels. A few in the public have heard of posts, taunts, and demands that sound like a dare. Change how your products work, or we'll let the world rifle through your internals. Somewhere, a manager whispers the sentence everyone knows is bad news. They have source. The room goes very quiet. In the calm, you can hear the choreography kick in. Isolate, validate, trace. Legal drafts language no one wants to publish. PR writes a statement that says as much as possible without confirming anything that the adversary could leverage. Threat Intel opens a thick file on a new extortion crew with habits that don't match the old ransomware playbook. Engineers stare at dependency graphs like maps of a coastline before a storm. The question isn't, are we up? The question is, what's left, who touched it, and how do we keep the next hand from getting in? This is the NVIDIA cyberattack of 2022. As it unfolds in the compressed present tense of an incident room, then with the long, cool breath of forensics and consequences. It's a breach that didn't lock screens or halt product lines, but did something more intimate and dangerous. It took the material that makes a modern chip company go, the code, the credentials, and the confidence that proprietary ideas can remain private long enough to become products. And it is the story of an adversary, Lapsus, whose demands sound like a manifesto. Open your drivers, remove the mining limiter, or we start the leak clock. NVIDIA is a software company disguised as a hardware company. The silicone is the headline, but the software is the oxygen. Drivers that translate between algorithms and transistors, firmware that orchestrates boot, frameworks that let developers speak fluent GPU, and the proprietary stitching that turns raw throughput into experiences people can feel on a screen. For a decade, that stack has been the canonical example of how to build a moat around performance, a marriage of architecture and code that evolves together. That is also why software theft hurts. Source code isn't just a map to what exists, it's a sketchbook of what's coming next. It reveals abstractions and optimizations, even the names of experiments that didn't ship. With the right pieces, a rival can learn faster or dodge patents. A malware writer can imitate the look and feel of the company's binaries. And with the wrong pieces, a downstream partner can be fooled by a signed file that shouldn't be trusted. In a world where trust is asserted with certificates and signatures, a stolen private key is a counterfeit money press. The 2022 attack matters because it lands at the junction of three currents. First, NVIDIA's ascent as an everything platform, graphics, AI, data center networking, turns its codebase into high-value intellectual property. Second, the attacker Lapsus employs tactics that defy neat categories of ransomware or APT. They are extortionists who prefer notoriety to self, who often skip encryption entirely and demand behavior change or cash in exchange for not leaking exfiltrated data. Third, the target list in the breach is a civics lesson in why software supply chains are fragile employee credentials, source code, and code signing certificates. The very instruments used to tell Windows and other platforms this file is safe. Add to a combustible context. In early 2022, demand for GPUs is white hot, and the chip's role in cryptocurrency mining has turned a performance feature into a political question. NVIDIA's light hash rate limiter is supposed to blunt mining on certain cards and nudge supply back toward gamers. Lapsus doesn't just want money, they want NVIDIA to remove the limiter and to open source their drivers. The ask is part ideology, part leverage, and part performance. It signals what this crew values: spectacle and control. It also places NVIDIA in a bind that isn't just about dollars, it's about product strategy. Finally, this matters because leaks can undermine the defensive ecosystem. When code signing certificates escape into the wild, the harm doesn't stop at one target. Those certs are passports in places where humans don't read the name: operating systems, EDRs, and installers that trust signatures more than context. In this case, within days of the leak, researchers began finding malware samples signed with NVIDIA's stolen certificates, and defenders scramble to write detections, block hashes, and nudge platform vendors to treat those signatures as toxic. It's a darkened version of reputation. The more widely trusted your name is, the more useful your stolen seal is. In mid-February of 2022, internally, something begins to go wrong. The public won't learn the date for another 2 weeks, but NVIDIA later said it became aware of a cybersecurity incident on February 23rd. In hindsight, this is the moment the incident moves from background noise to a staffed, escalating response. SOCs pivot to containment, identity teams turn dials, executives get briefed. Outwardly, operations continue. Inwardly, the cadence of ordinary work is interrupted by evidence gathering and the first passes at scoping what's at risk. On February 25th, word gets out that NVIDIA is investigating an incident. Business press and tech media begin connecting it to the broader climate of heightened cyber risk linked to the invasion of Ukraine. NVIDIA neither confirms nor elaborates, but the story is in motion. Meanwhile, in places where breach chatter lives, a name begins to surface: Lapsus. The group is active on Telegram, and their style, public taunts, unusual demands, it feels different from the disciplined ransomware crews defenders are used to. Between February 28th and March 1st, the extortion phase begins. Lapsus posts claims that they had admin access for a week, exfiltrated roughly a terabyte of data, and will leak pieces unless NVIDIA meets their conditions. Those conditions morph across posts: remove the LHR mining limiter, open source GPU drivers. The group shares samples to prove possession. NVIDIA publicly confirmed a breach on March 1st, stating that employee credentials and proprietary information were stolen, but that there is no evidence of ransomware in the environment and no expected disruption to business or customers. The company says it has engaged incident response experts and notified law enforcement. By early March, the leaks start in earnest. Among the most attention-grabbing drops, source code related to DLSS, the deep learning technique that lets games render fewer pixels and then reconstruct detail with an AI model. Screenshots and archives circulate widely. Journalists and researchers confirm that the files appear authentic, including C++ source code and developer documentation. At the same time, a separate thread is starting to surface. NVIDIA driver and firmware adjacent source appears in the leak, and with it something worse: 2 NVIDIA code signing certificates with private keys. You can feel the collective intake of breath in the security world as samples show up on VirusTotal and elsewhere. Malware now carrying NVIDIA's signature. From March 3rd and 4th, credential fallout. Have I Been Owned and multiple outlets report that email addresses and hashed passwords for more than 71,000 NVIDIA employees are part of the data set. That number isn't just a headline, it's a workload for 1,000 IT hands, forced resets, token revocations, extra scrutiny of downstream services that use those same credentials. For attackers who fish in credential leaks, for reuse and pivot, this is oxygen. For defenders, it's a triage list that touches every part of the internal estate. From March 5th through the 8th, The code signing crisis sharpens. Bleeping Computer and others document malware signed with the leaked certificates. Tom's Hardware highlights that Windows, in some contexts, still loads drivers with expired signatures, meaning age alone doesn't neuter the risk. NVIDIA, in a March 8th update, stresses that the leaked certificates are expired and points to mitigations, but everyone understands the immediate problem. An expired cert can still help bad drivers slip past checks on specific configurations, and the cleanup will require block lists and revocation at the OS layer, as well as hygiene inside enterprises. Meanwhile, a sideshow. Lapsus alleges that NVIDIA hacked back, encrypting data on the attacker's machines. The claim ricochets through the press because the image of a chip giant going on offense is irresistible. Reporters speak to sources who doubt the allegation. NVIDIA doesn't confirm it because under the noise, the real work continues. Forensics, notifications, mitigations, and the slow march of communications that say what can be said without oversharing or understating risk. The weeks that follow, as the immediate fever breaks, the longer tail takes over. Employees rotate credentials and live under tighter access rules. Partners get briefed. Security teams write detections for anything signed with the leaked certificates. Microsoft and other vendors tune block lists and guidance so that expired, but now toxic signatures get treated as they should. Not a pass, but a flag. The episode has become part of the industry's shared memory, a case study in extortion without encryption, in the dangers of stolen trust anchors, and in the speed at which leaks propagate through ecosystems measured in hundreds of millions of endpoints.
We need to be precise about what we know and what we don't, though. NVIDIA did not publicly confirm a single initial access vector. Lapsus, as a group, has a known playbook: credential theft, SIM swaps, MFA fatigue, buying access, and social engineering. But attributing any one of those to this incident would be speculation. What we can say with confidence is the post-access sequence: exfiltration of source code and internal data, theft of employee credentials, and compromise of 2 code signing certificates whose private keys were later used to sign malware. That trifecta, code, creds, and certs, is a nightmare because it touches 3 different control planes: intellectual property, identity, and software trust. Start with the source code. Why does grabbing code matter in 2022? Because modern GPUs are software-defined systems as much as they are hardware. DLSS, the crown jewel feature in the headlines, is a blend of model and method, a neural network trained to reconstruct images, plus the pipeline glue and the driver that moves tensors and pixels correctly. You leak that glue, and you don't instantly grant a rival your performance. You do give them insight into the decisions you've made, the trade-offs you embraced, and the interfaces where their own code will have to meet yours. You also arm reverse engineers and cheat authors with intimate knowledge of timing and hooks. And the broader leak set, driver and firmware adjacent sources reveal how the ecosystems are expected to behave with components. A cookbook for building binaries that look legit even when they aren't. Then, credentials. A dump of tens of thousands of employee email addresses and password hashes is both a to-do list and a risk multiplier. Even if the hashes are strong, plan for the worst: fast, mandatory resets, rotating secrets and systems that those accounts could touch, and monitoring for reuse and third-party services. In organizations at NVIDIA scale, employees authenticate to cloud collaboration, CI/CD systems, artifact repositories, internal wikis, and vendor portals. A single reused password on a cloud dev tool, say, can turn a breach at headquarters into a pivot into a SaaS tenant, and from there into downstream customers if tokens are reused. That's why the credential piece of this story is a long tail. Attackers will test those combos for years, and defenders will live with the elevated background noise in their logs for just as long. Finally, code signing certificates. Here, the technical nuance matters. A code signing certificate links a public key to an entity, in this case, NVIDIA Corporation. that is vouched for by a certificate authority. Developers use the corresponding private key to sign drivers and executables, operating systems, and security tools. Upon seeing that signature and trusting the CA, relax certain checks or avoid issuing warnings to users. Two such NVIDIA certificates, now expired, leaked. Expiry doesn't mean benign. Due to backward compatibility behaviors and timestamping, Windows, under specific configurations, still accepts drivers with expired certs, and at the time, it would load them if other conditions were met. Within days, researchers observed malware and offensive tools, Quasar Rat, Mimikatz, rogue drivers bearing NVIDIA's signature, which lets them masquerade as trusted in some contexts or slip past overly permissive checks. In response, though, defenders turn to block lists and revocations, add the leaked certs to OS enforced deny lists, teach EDRs to treat anything signed with those certs as suspect. It's messy because you can't just delete history without risking collateral damage to legitimate older software. Now, step back and look at the attacker's leverage. Traditional ransomware seizes up availability, encrypt, disrupt, demand payment for keys. Lapsus goes after confidentiality and authenticity. They exfiltrate data and threaten to publish it. They steal a brand seal, code signing keys, and use it to turn the victim's reputation into a weapon. They demand that the victim alter the product strategy, not just pay up. It's extortion for the age of cloud repos and instant virality. For defenders, use to detonation logic to stop the encryptor, restore from backup. This is a more brutal battlefield. Once a secret leaves, it's gone. Once a signing key leaks, it will be abused until the ecosystem can invalidate it everywhere that matters. The technical countermeasures live at several layers. In identity, you assume that employee credential dumps will happen and plan fast lane resets, step up authentication, and device binding that makes stolen passwords less useful. In code handling, you treat internal repositories as crown jewels, segmented access, mandatory reviews, secret scanning that prevents credentials from living in code, and staging environments that don't share tokens with production. Keys live in hardware security modules with split knowledge, strict role-based access, and verifiable logs. Private keys are rotated and never exported. Build systems don't bake trust into their default paths. And as the NVIDIA incident showed the entire industry, you work with platform vendors so that when a cert leaks, there's a well-tested sequence for blocking it without bricking fleets of legitimate software that used to rely on it. One more technical footnote, because it will matter again, a leaked source is not the same as a weaponized source. A lot of commentary in early March leapt from DLSS code leak to DLSS clone tomorrow. That confuses complexity with legibility. NVIDIA's advantage isn't just code, it's training data, model architecture choices, and a gigantic distribution of driver updates and developer relationships. A determined adversary learns from a leak. They don't become you. The urgent risk in the near term is less photocopy the crown jewels and more impersonate the crown to slip past your guards.
The immediate business impact is, by design, curiously non-dramatic. NVIDIA says there is no evidence of ransomware and no anticipated disruption to customer service. Developers keep coding, GPUs keep shipping, partners don't see order systems go dark. That's not spin, it's the nature of exfiltration first, extortion. The harm is asymmetric and slow. It lands on brand, on trust, on the secondary ecosystem that depends on NVIDIA's name as a signature of safety. For employees, the breach is personal. Notices go out, forced resets happen. People who didn't sign up to be part of a headline now have to treat every phishing email for the next year as a potential follow-up. Because their addresses and password histories are in circulation, the company's identity team becomes a temporary weather service, watching for storms blowing in from reused credentials on third-party sites, rotating secrets faster than planned, and fielding the human questions that follow every publicized password dump. For customers and the broader community, the signing certificate leak is the most consequential ripple. Within days, malware signed with NVIDIA's name shows up in the wild on systems where driver integrity checks don't enforce the latest block lists or where expired signatures still pass under specific policy settings. That signature can buy malware a few precious minutes or hours of invisibility. Security teams respond with layered mitigations, block at the EDR level, push OS updates that include the latest block list entries, and critically, turn on features like memory integrity that make it harder for rogue drivers to load in the first place. This is the defense in depth cliche given teeth. When a trust anchor is abused, you want three other gates that make the abuse less effective. In the public square, the demands themselves become part of the story. Lapsus doesn't just threaten to leak until paid, they pressure NVIDIA to change the product, drop LHR, open source drivers. That shifts the narrative from company pays, secret stay secret, to company complies, and the market changes. It's a dangerous precedent because it invites crews to treat extortion as product management. NVIDIA does not exceed. The leaks roll on, and the industry learns a new phrase to add to its threat models: extortion by ideology. There's also the question of deterrence. Reports surface that NVIDIA might have hacked back, encrypting the attacker's data. The story sizzles for a week, and then it fades into a gray zone of denials, caveats, and a source close to the incident, skepticism. Even if true, it wouldn't change the strategic lesson. Defensive hacking stories make splashy copy. Long-term resilience is still built on the boring disciplines of identity, signing, and segmentation. The episode does, however, foreshadow a future in which victims explore more aggressive defensive measures and in which legal and ethical debates about active defense move from panels to boardrooms. Inside NVIDIA, the remediation program becomes a multi-quarter body of work. Secret scannings expand. Keys move deeper into hardware. Access models revolve around least privilege. Build systems and release pipelines get extra instrumentation. The cost is time and attention that would have gone to features. The return is a network and a set of processes that treat code like cash, credentials like crown jewels, and signing keys like nuclear launch codes. A few of these changes make headlines, but all of them make the subsequent attempted breach harder. For the industry, the breach is a teaching case. It proves that extortion today can thrive without encryption. It reminds everyone that code signing ecosystems are only as strong as the least cautious steward of a private key, and that expired does not equal harmless when loaders and policies are permissive. It recenters identity as the blast radius, because once 70,000 plus hashes exist outside your walls, the walls are not the edge. And it accelerates conversations about transparency. What should companies say and when the thing stolen is the very text of how they build it? Looking at the future outlook, first, we need to expect code signing to be treated like production, not paperwork. The NVIDIA incident made it painfully clear that private keys are not just developer tools, they are infrastructure for security. Mature organizations will move signing into hardware security modules with strict role separation, short-lived signing certificates, mandatory dual control for key use, and immutable logs. Build systems will sign in enclaves. Developers will never see or touch the raw keys. Platform vendors will continue tightening the loop between a leaked cert and ecosystem-wide block lists, and they'll keep pushing features like HVCI and Smart App Control into default on territory so that rogue drivers can't load even if they're wrapped in a stolen signature. Second, source code handling will grow up, or else. Companies used to assume that the worst outcome of a repo breach was a messy PR cycle. Now, it's clear the source theft cascades. It accelerates reverse engineering, helps attacker write convincing malware, and exposes embedded secrets that were never meant to be there. Expect to see broad adoption of secret scanning pre-commit hooks, service accounts with per repo scoping, zero trust access to code hosting, and automated anomaly detection tuned for off hours mass clone, and sudden user agent changes on Git activity. The goal is not to make code unreadable, it's to make abnormal reads obvious and containable. Third, identity fatigue is the new ransomware fatigue. After any high profile credential leak, opportunistics scrape for reuse and pivot for months to years. Organizations will respond by driving phishing resistant authentication deeper into the org, FIDO2 keys bound to hardware, number matching and device geofencing by default, and risk-based step-ups that care less about where the user is and more about what they're trying to do. Just as significantly, password culture will shift. Long, unique, manager-enforced credentials, and automatic locks when the same hash appears in public dumps. The "we rotate when forced" stance will give way to "we rotate because adversaries test our employees," passed against our present every day. Fourth, extortion crews will keep experimenting with leverage. Lapsus showed that change your product to suit us can sit alongside pay us. Future crews will try change your policy, drop this feature for this market, or release these components under open licenses. Companies need ethics and strategy rehearsals for those asks so they don't invent their stance on a conference call with negotiators and counsel. The general rule will hold. Do not give in to behavior change extortion. But the specifics, what to say to customers, what to say to regulators, which technical compromises are safe, will be hammered out in real time if leadership hasn't thought them through in advance. Fifth, and finally, platform hygiene will be a shared responsibility. Microsoft, Apple, and Linux distributions reacted quickly to the NVIDIA cert leak with guidance and, over time, stronger defaults on driver loading and block lists. That tempo needs to become muscle memory across the entire ecosystem. When a cert leaks, there should be a well-understood choreography. CA involvement, OS vendor block list updates, EDR rule sets, and public advisories that don't leave defenders guessing. Enterprises should rehearse their side. Identify where older drivers signed with now toxic certs live, test mitigations and staging, and push the changes without bricking fleets. The alternative is thousands of islands and inconsistent policy that attackers will be happy to have in their environment. So in closing, let's go back to the room on the day the first leak drops. There's no fire alarm, no flashing red light, just a collective understanding that something intimate has been taken and will now live where strangers can pore over it at leisure. The engineers who wrote the code feel it in their bones. The operations teams think it in the churn of their dashboards. The executives feel it in the way every sentence must carry both trust and restraint. What you hear in that room is not panic, it's craft. What did they take? What else did they touch? What do we revoke? What do we say to our people and our partners that tells the truth and protects them? The NVIDIA breach is not a morality play about victims and villains, where a single act, pay or don't pay, decides the ending. It's a study in how much of modern trust is powder fine and portable. A password hash copied from an internal directory becomes a skeleton key months later on a SaaS admin panel. A private key exfiltrated from a signing system becomes a papier-mâché mask that fools an OS into allowing a rogue driver into the kernel. A feature that excited a market, AI-assisted upscaling, becomes a bargaining chip for a crew that wants a company to bend its product toward their narrative. If you're listening with the responsibility to prevent the next one, your job is not to become a hero who hacks back, it's to make theft less useful. Bind identity to hardware-backed factors so a leaked password is just noise. Keep code in compartments that make mass exfiltration obvious and risky. Treat signing keys like you would treat production encryption keys. Cold controlled, never exportable, with a plan for rapid revocation that doesn't crater your customer's Tuesday morning. And practice what you hope to never perform. The leak first extortion tabletop, where the artifact on the screen is your source tree and the clock is public. If you're part of the ecosystem that decides what runs on people's machines, learn from the CERT episode and turn that lesson into defaults. Push the vulnerable driver block list to every box. Make the memory, integrity, and similar protections opt out, not opt in. Coordinate in daylight when a victim's trust anchors are abused, so defenders aren't hunting for the right to deny in a forum thread. If you're a CA, keep your breach muscle limber, because the window between we know a key leaked and the world stops trusting us is the crucible where your reputation is forged or cracked. And if you're an engineer who loves what good code can do on good silicone, let the dread land where it should, not on the idea of features existing, but on the systems that allow a stranger to turn a company's own name into camouflage. The antidote isn't paranoia, it's rigor. Do the boring things beautifully. Make identity checks feel like physics, not policy. Make the path from source to signed binary a locked hallway with cameras, not a cut through in a cubicle maze. Make it easy to say no to convenience that widens the blast radius. Then, help your comms team write the sentences that tell a public story without handing the adversary a script. In the end, the NVIDIA attack reads like a blueprint for the era we're in. Extortion without encryption, spectacle without stealth, and pressure applied at the places where trust is manufactured, not consumed. The good news is that the defenses are knowable. The bad news is that they are not glamorous. So build them anyway. This is not a tale about a company felled by a single blow. It's a reminder that the difference between a bad week and a bad year is how seriously you take the unsexy work before a stranger comes for your crown, and how calmly you keep doing the work after.